Hello and welcome to the Everything is Black and White podcast. It's time for another episode of the Bird's Eye View with the Mirror's Simon Bird. I'm your host, Andrew Musgrove, and today we've got a host of questions to ask Simon all about Newcastle United, focusing primarily on the January transfer window. Thank you to everyone who's sent the questions in over email and social media. A lot of you did do, and we've got through, and we're going to get through the best of them. Just a quick reminder, this episode is brought to you by NORD VPN. You know what to do by now if you want to be secure when you're out there using your public Wi-Fi. Keep your details safe. Hit that link in the podcast description box and take advantage of a very special offer. Simon, welcome back to the podcast. How are you keeping you well?
All good, thanks. Yeah. Icy cycle in today. Pretty dodgy out on the roads and freezing cold, but I made it in one piece.
I'm glad to see you have done. I was a little bit worried when you said you were setting off.
Yeah, no, made it. I had to go very slowly. Quite crisp, lovely over the town moor. Absolutely beautiful day. So
I can tell I'm getting old because I bought a windscreen cover yesterday after de-icing the car yesterday morning. Thinking I'm not doing that again. Put it on last night, woke up this morning, went out, literally 30 seconds, off it comes, not a bit of ice on the window, and I am so pleased with it.
Such a granddad old man comment, Andrew.
It's one of those things. Best £8 I've ever spent.
I might try and get one if I have a car in the future.
Exactly, there you go. You know what it is? It saves you so much time in the morning. I had a nice cup of coffee,
lovely.
Caught up on the news.
And you didn't have to let your car idle and pollute the air.
Exactly, or risk it getting
to warm it up.
Yeah. There's loads of benefits. Loads of benefits, just like a NORD VPN subscription. See what we did there?
You get a sponsorship, a car cover sponsorship for the podcast.
Yeah, we'll get them in
next.
Loads of questions to get through. Like I said, thank you to everyone who has got in touch, because the January transfer window is not that far away. We are recording this on the 19th of November, and of course, the January transfer window will open on the 1st. First thing to say, though, when we ask about what Newcastle United need in the January transfer window, it's fair to say it's a little bit difficult to predict, isn't it, given that we are still about 5 or 6 weeks away.
Yeah, so there will be planning going on, a lot of planning, and it'll be getting ramped up for the window. But you've got to say what they might need in January could be very different to what they need now or what they think they need now. So there are lots of factors at play. You look at the positions they might need. Sven Botman is due back left-hand side of centre defence in January. That was the latest Eddie Howe update. Now, if Botman comes back in January, do they still need to sign a centre-back? Will that be their priority kind of position to splash tens of millions if they've got tens of millions? We'll come on to that later. If Joe Linton is still playing really well on the right wing and he can fill that berth, and that was seen as a weakness, and suddenly Joe Linton and Anthony Gordon have got those two positions covered and it looks solid and it's working, then that becomes less of a priority. If that falls to bits and isn't working, then maybe the right wing's the priority. And then the striker position, which I think is the other kind of position which probably needs strengthening, is Callum Wilson going to get fit? Massive question. Hopefully he will, and they'll get another 6 months out of him. Does Alexander Isak get injured? So there are other injuries in the squad which could happen, which would really would shape a transfer. So Newcastle will be looking at a short-term fix, but they would also be dominated in kind of a long-term plan. So I don't think they'd be spending lots of money on a short-term fix if it didn't fit with a long-term plan as well. So you have to take injuries and form into consideration.
Well, John has emailed in and he has asked, does Newcastle United's league position come January the 1st impact who they sign in that month?
No, because I think they've got a longer term plan than that when they're investing tens of millions of pounds. I don't think they're going to be I think the league is so tight this year that they could be in contention for top 4 or top 6 come January, but they could actually be in 10th. There's 3-4 points between 7 or 8 clubs, and the league's going to stay like that for a few months because a lot of teams are doing well that you didn't expect to do well. Other teams are coming from behind, like Man United will probably revive. Newcastle have revived. So I think it won't depend on that. It'll be transfers are got to be done on where they see the club in 3 years' time and how much they can improve the club in 1, 2, 3 years' time. Not let's just panic buy, splash a load of money to try and get 4th place or 5th place. It won't work like that.
But with that being said, given what we just talked about a couple of minutes ago about you saying what they might need now is maybe a little bit different to what they'll need in 6 weeks' time, does the answer you've just given not then suggest that actually it might not, because you're saying they're planning long term and it doesn't really matter maybe what happens with Sven Botman when he comes back? If they still want a centre back, they will go out and get a centre back.
That is true. If they think there'll be contract situations to take into consideration as well with Fab Shah, Dan Burn's extended, but there will have a chart saying when people's. I remember reading a piece with David Moyes when he was in charge of Everton, and the secret room they had with when a player's contract runs out and who and they had a defined list of targets up there about who could slot in for him in a year's time and when the moves for those players could be made. So there will be a master plan somewhere. You'd hope. I'm sure there will be. So yeah, you're not going to say. You could make an argument that Newcastle being in a higher position and the better they're doing, and the stronger Eddie Howe looks, and the more solid the future is looking for Newcastle, and a higher position will excite the PIF to approve deals. You could make an argument for that the Saudis will think, we're up there, let's go again. Let's try and refresh this squad, rather than if Newcastle are in 12th thinking, oh God, let's just wait till the summer. So there is an argument for saying that the better they're doing, the more kind of enthused they will be to doing a deal and strengthening again.
I think what we will see is that master plan executed. I think they will have their targets. They'll be doing the work now, and then should they need to react in the first couple of weeks of the window, if someone gets injured or someone might be sold, I think we can also see that Newcastle United are open to doing that as well. But I think the foundation of the January transfer market will be pretty much known as we sit here. I think they will know who they want.
But then there will also be the added consideration of Newcastle wanting to be opportunistic, and there are deals which materialize, which will materialize in January, which you don't expect to be materializing in November, which might fit the profile of what they want and might just be too good to not turn down. And that is, Newcastle have been hampered by the PSR rules, and we know all about that. We've debated that and how unfair it is for the club to be held back. But there are other clubs also subject to PSR rules who might be desperate to sell in January, who might have an asset which they need to offload, or assets who they're considering offloading. And I think there is an opportunity for Newcastle to look at those clubs if they've got money, which we think they have, and be opportunistic. Like the Anthony Gordon deal was done in January. Is January a bad time to buy? Well, that proves that it could be a good time to buy. Everton needed to sell, they needed to cash in, and Anthony Gordon needed to move on, and they've bought a gem there. So there are constraints with doing deals in January. The consensus is that it's a bad time to buy, it's a panic time to buy, and it's an expensive time to buy, and you pay over the odds. But that's not necessarily the case if you can do the right deals and you're doing the planning now to know what's going to be available in a surprise way as well.
I think what we saw with that Anthony Gordon deal was Newcastle United getting a player for a position that they didn't necessarily think was a priority, but the deal was so good that they couldn't turn it down, and they probably would have gone in for him maybe in the summer, but when it became known that he was available for 40 odd million, it looked like the right deal to do, and it's proven so as well. I think over the last few windows, we've seen Newcastle United both be reactive to something like that, but also have that long-term strategy. But what is interesting is that all happened under Amanda Staveley and Midad Gadusi and Dan Ashworth. Things have changed now, and this is the first real big test of Paul Mitchell, the rest of the team. Eddie Howe will chuck in there as well. Given how bad the summer was on the transfer front, we've had loads of questions sent in about how big of a month it is for Paul Mitchell when it comes to the January transfer window.
Yeah, it is absolutely key, isn't it? Mitchell's now been in situ for since July, so he's had a good few months to do an evaluation of what the club's about, where it's going, how the scouting's going, and he made comments when he did an interview with us and the newspaper journalists a few months ago about needing to improve the data collection and the way they're identifying players in markets which are kind of undervalued, like South America, for instance. So that he'll be working behind the scenes to improve all that, maybe widen the scope of the scouting and widen the kind of research they've got available to themselves, and narrowing targets down based on that. But you're right. See, there's an argument that Newcastle aren't desperate to buy, and I've heard this said that there is money, but they might not spend it, or they know it's not a very good time to buy, and if they do buy, they're going to have to sell either now or before June. So they're all valid arguments, but if you've not signed Eddie Howe, a player, a guaranteed first-team player in the last 3 windows, you've got a new sporting director in place. I would wager that Paul Mitchell wants to make a splash and will want to, I mean, not justify his position because he's there to do lots of other jobs, but he'll want a headline thing, I would think, this January to say, here we are, I'm the sporting director, I've just done a great deal for the club. This is what I'm about. We want more of this. And he's only got 2 windows to make this kind of high profile impact in. And I can't imagine him going effectively a full year in the job without making a good addition to Newcastle United as sporting director. So I would think Mitchell is definitely wanting to impress his bosses at the club, to want to show Eddie how he can get deals over the line, and also wanting to show the fans that he can strike good deals. So it's a big window for him. And it's also a big window for that Eddie Howe, Paul Mitchell relationship as well. There was a great picture of them when they were away training in Saudi this week. They were sat next to each other, watching the boxing, I believe. I mean, it didn't look like they were chatting or giving each other a hug in the auditorium there, but they were sat together. So there's clearly behind the scenes, that's a little small indication of like relationship building, or I don't know whether they chose to sit together or not, but there is clearly like contact being made there. And Mitchell, like you did in the summer, is bending over backwards to keep Eddie Howe in the picture and build that relationship. I would hope Eddie Howe is trying to do the same as well. It's a very new situation. It's a new dynamic. And I also think, as well as the test of Paul Mitchell getting deals over the line, it's also a very big test on how Eddie Howe and Paul Mitchell can work together to, and there might be disagreements, but how can they overcome these kind of differences in opinions and come up with a strategy that allows players to be sold and that comes up with an agreement for who can be bought and improved and strengthen Newcastle.
I think the other thing as well, which is really important, is getting a deal done of a certain magnitude early on. Yeah. Because the longer January goes on without a big signing, I think Newcastle United risk the negativity around Mitchell and how to creep in. And we saw how that affected the team during the summer. It wasn't very good for them at all. And there's been plenty of questions to whether it actually affected the team going into the beginning of the season. Look, and it's not as easy as just saying, right, this person is going to be signed on the 1st or 2nd of January. But I do think they will be thinking about that. Let's get something done. Let's set the tone really early on. But again, it's not the easiest of tasks, is it?
No, I mean, in the ideal situation, the window opens, you put your money on the table and you buy someone. But I think everyone's going to have to be very patient because that kind of those big deals tend not to happen early. Because if you're a selling club and the people who want to buy a player off you are getting more and more desperate, and the fans are getting more and more anxious, and maybe other teams, the longer you let a transfer saga go on, the more other teams can come in for a player and raise the money and kind of hike the price a little bit. So I think expecting Newcastle to deliver something in the first week of the January transfer window is possibly unrealistic. And I think everyone's probably got to temper their expectations, because the window opens and we're always immediately writing about transfers, speculating, wondering who's going to come in. Everyone's getting excited. And then there's usually just a massive lull. And we're thinking, what is going on? And people start to panic. And then you're right. That's the key thing. People will be reading into it, a relationship there between Howe and Mitchell because of what's been written in the past, thinking that this is not good. They can't agree on a signing. They can't get one over the line. And I just think everyone needs to roll back on that a little bit. And deals are usually done in the last 4 or 5. It's a domino effect. The last 4 or 5 days of the January transfer window. We end up waiting till January the 25th for stuff to happen, and it's not great for fans. It's not great for clubs probably, but it probably is the realistic thing that marketplace dictates.
Well, I hope we don't have to wait that long to see the sign. I would like it to happen as early as possible. I would like Newcastle United to be picking up the phone now to Brentford and saying, look, we like Brian and Burmo. There's nothing then stopping Brentford, picking up the phone to an Arsenal or a Liverpool and saying, by the way, Newcastle are circling here. Deals can't be done quickly, right? They can't be.
Well, there was such protracted discussions, they knew who they wanted. Newcastle knew who they wanted in the summer, and it was Marc Guehi. And Marc Guehi would have come, and presumably the personal terms were all arranged. He knew it was going to get. And the one thing we heard about the Marc Guehi deal when Palace turned it down was Parish, the chairman, the co-owner of Palace, he basically lost his club 60 odd million there. He could have banked 60 odd million for Crystal Palace and for the other shareholders in Crystal Palace. And the fact is, he didn't. And when you're a shareholder and you've just turned down a massive deal or out of belligerence and trying to be clever, I don't think it goes down too well with other shareholders when that could have been reinvested in other people, in other players. So I wouldn't be surprised if Parish is under pressure to kind of revive that deal and get the money for Guehi through the door. They've not had a great start to the season. Guehi's not had a great start to the season, and it might well be, there's a bit of unsettlement there, and the player needs a fresh start. I mean, that'd be amazing if they got Guehi, wouldn't it? Because that would be, the other day Newcastle would have three of the defensive back four for England. So incredible situation that would be. So yeah, what I'm saying is,
that's a deal that could potentially
happen early, yeah, because there's been so much background work done on it. If you're conjuring a signing that we've not heard of yet, that it's probably going to take a bit longer.
Well, that was one of the questions sent in by Dom, who asked whether Guehi was one to revisit or whether it was a bullet dodged.
I'm sure they'll be revisiting it. The transfer decisions aren't done on a whim. You don't watch Marc Guehi for 10 games this season and think, he's no good, we don't want him. So he's in the system. They've scouted him extensively. They know what he's about. He's an unbelievable character. He's an absolute Eddie Howe Newcastle squad character. He's humble. He's eloquent. He's serious about his job. So he ticks all the boxes for Newcastle as a centre half for the next 5 years. So if the deal's there to be done, you would suggest go and do it. I think you go and do it, even though there might be priorities elsewhere. But then they're probably going to have to sell. The word is that they're probably going to have to sell. If they buy now, they'll have to sell in January, or they'll have to sell before June. So you might have a bit of a panic on again.
Just on the price tag for Guehi, we think it was around 65, 70 million pounds was where Palace were looking for, and Newcastle United were at the table around those figures as well. Are you now looking at Guehi at maybe 30, 40 million?
I don't think Palace will go that low. And if you're Palace thinking we've just played him for 12 games, but we've lost 20 million for playing him in those 20 games.
With 6 months less on his contract, he's not signing a new deal.
That is true. He is getting devalued, but I think you'd probably still be putting 50 million quid on the table for him.
Well, one of the questions linked to that was from Tommy, and he said, we know about the £70 million on the table for Marc Guehi in the summer. Is that there to spend on others in January? Because you mentioned a few times, Simon, already in the podcast about maybe needing to sell to buy, but a lot of people will then be asking, well, wait there, Newcastle United were ready to pay at least 60 million for Marc Guehi, so where's that money gone?
Well, PSR is a complicated thing to work out from the outside when you're looking at accounts from like a year and a half ago. So only the people inside the club will know that. And the suggestion is that if they the money's there, they can spend it, but by the end of the accounting year in June, they're going to have to recoup it and balance it up, like they did with hopefully not like panic in such a desperate situation like they did with Elliot Anderson and the Greek keeper who came in, Vlachodimos.
There we go.
Got it right. Finally got it right. That's because I watched him twice for Greece. And like the Elliot Anderson situation. So, there's going to be, there's going to be a rebalancing of the books. So you'd have to be selling straight, or you have to have someone lined up to sell by the end of June. So that's going to, or do it in January. It depends on what market you can get for fringe players or homegrown players, and what the PSR book value is of players in your squad as to who you want to sell. This is going to be a position that a lot of clubs are in. So a lot of trading is going to be going on. There's not a lot of money on the table for Almiron, I wouldn't have thought.
Well, this is it, isn't it?
Yeah.
Do Newcastle have a problem that when you take out their star players, their blue chip players, the likes of Isaac, the likes of Bruno, that they don't have anyone really to sell for money that makes your eyes water, that you can really reinvest? You mentioned Almiron, who's really going to pay more than 10 to 12 million for him? We talked about Sean Longstaff in the summer. He is now one of the first names on the team sheet, so he's not going to go anywhere. And I was thinking about this the other day. If you look around on the second level of that squad, who really can Newcastle United sell to make a difference to the pot?
That's a really good point. I mean, it is a really good point, and that's that's a legacy of the club moving from where it was to moving to be an ambitious club, and those assets not having a. I think if we do having this conversation in 5 years' time, in 10 years' time, hopefully Newcastle will have 11 big assets worth 40 million, and that's the kind of area they've got to be in. If you look at their rivals, Tottenham, Liverpool, Arsenal, you look at their starting 11, and I would have thought you wouldn't get one of any of them for less than 40, 50 million, which is not the case for Newcastle. And that's like club building, isn't it? That's what Mitchell's there to do, to build a club and build a value. I've seen it happen at Sunderland. Sunderland's squad has gone from 10 million when it went value when they were in League One, and the chief executive of Sunderland now thinks it's worth 100 million plus. And they've built that squad and bolstered it and got youngsters in who've added value. That's kind of what Mitchell is there to do with Eddie Howe now. And Eddie Howe's proved he can turn Lewis Hall, for instance, from he's 35 million now, but if he's England left back for the next 5 years at the World Cup, he's going to be 60 million. So that's the kind of asset building they've got to do. But we've also got to get used to the fact that when you build that asset up, you might have to cash in and go again. But they're not. You're right. The point you made at the start of that is that there are blue chip assets. So what we're looking at: Isaac, Bruno, Tonali, Joe Linton, possibly.
Botman, I think you would probably.
Botman would be right. Botman would get interest from all around Europe. So you've got 5 proper blue chip assets. Gordon's in there, 6. That's almost a full team. So, but
you don't want to lose.
You don't want to lose too many of them. I mean, and you can go through the qualities of each of them. Isaac, you can't replace Isaac. That is a big gamble, a big risk to sell Isaac.
The point is, you mentioned that Liverpool and Tottenham, and if you look back over the last few years at the players they've sold, that you might not count as their blue chip players. They've got those fringe players to sell. I mean, we only saw in the summer Newcastle were linked to several of Liverpool's defenders, which would cost them the best part of 40 odd million. That's what Newcastle don't have. They don't have players who aren't blue chip that other teams around them want to spend 30, 40 million pounds on. And I think that's really going to sting them, not just in the next couple of windows, but actually the next couple of years.
Yeah, like Kwanzaa, for instance, at Liverpool, the Liverpool centre-half developed him from the academy. So he's been worth nothing, and then they've brought him through, and he doesn't play every game. He plays some games, but he's built his reputation by being around a top team and getting games and looking good when he plays. And suddenly, he's worth 30, 40 million? I mean, that Newcastle really need, this is about the whole club building. They really need not just to be buying 50, 60, 70 million pound players, but they need a few academy graduates like Lewis Miley, who's on the track of doing this, to be coming through and getting experience, age 18, 19, 20, and when they reach 21, 22, you're making a decision on whether they're going to be the blue chip player to push Newcastle on to win a league or win a cup, or whether they're kind of in the squad but fringy and you can cash in on them for the full value on your PSR. So, they need more players in the belly of that squad worth more money.
Because that's the issue. We spoke about it before. The players that ideally you'd want to sell in January, you'd want to get something for Kieran Trippier, at least I would. I know you think you still got something to offer. You would want to get something for Callum Wilson, for Miguel Almiron. But other than that, I mean, who else can you really sell in January that others would be attracted to? I mean, those 3, I can't see many suitors for them.
So you're thinking Wilson. Well, obviously Wilson's not playing much, needs to get fit. You're not going to sell him if Isaac gets crocked, because you're not going to get the goals from the under 21 Osolu. And then it's such a difficult thing. They're not in this position of strength at the minute. The squad balance isn't quite there in terms of the right ages and the fitness of various aging players. I mean, this is why this time last year, Darren Eales gave an interview he had the newspaper press back in, and effectively we walked away from that interview and thought, and it was, oh my God, he's put everyone up for sale effectively. I mean, he basically opened the door to offers for everyone. This was before the January, probably it was early December when we did the interview, and we thought, wow, what's he done that for? That's madness. But then obviously it unfolded that they needed it for the PSR. We didn't realize they were in such a serious PSR situation, and that's why we saw Trippier touted around, Callum Wilson touted to even Atletico Madrid, trying to cash in on those players who the deals didn't come off or they didn't want to go. So I think this time they've probably got to bite the bullet and get those deals happening, so that there's money out, so that the wages are off the books, and you bring a bit of cash in as well.
But it is a case that they're going to have to probably accept less than they want for these players. I mean, Miguel Almiron rumoured that there was a £20 million plus asking price on his head, and no one's going to pay that for him. Callum Wilson, how much are you going to get for Callum Wilson, realistically, given his track record? Kieran Trippier coming to the last...
I still think Callum Wilson's a bargain at 10 million.
I think it's a gamble. That's the gamble.
Yeah, it is.
Because the first thing buyers will say is, well, you're selling them because you can't keep fit. They're not, teams aren't stupid.
Yeah.
So it's a massive gamble, and I do think Newcastle will try to raise funds, but they might raise less than they wanted, and that's just the bullet they're going to have to take for them to really beat the PSR issues. But it's
it's not an ideal situation for Newcastle to be in.
I think they might have to be a bit clever as well. Maybe the whole Fabian Schär thing is quite interesting. Could you get him to sign a new deal? Then in the summer you put him up for sale, and you get a 10, 12 million pound for him, which is an £8 million profit
from Italy somewhere. Could you?
Something like that.
I mean, or Spain. Fabian Schär has still got a lot of good years to give.
I wouldn't be surprised if that happened, because there's a good bit of profit.
Yes,
Sean Longstaff, as we say, seems to be the key to that midfield at the moment. But if we're looking around, and it happened last summer reluctantly, that is pure profit there. If he continues to perform the way he has, come the summer, how much is he worth if he keeps his form up?
30.
40. You just don't know. And then did Newcastle have a decision to make there? Because again, it goes back to just being about pure profit.
Yeah, it does. And then you look at Lewis Miley. How many games is Lewis Miley going to get in this team at the minute? He's on the bench, and then, you probably want to keep him to develop him, but someone might take a silly punt on an 18-year-old, thinking Lewis Miley's worth 30, 40 million. And because he's unproven talent, he's proven talent, he's going to go places, but he's kind of also got that potential to really go on and be 60, 70 million. But Newcastle might not be the club to develop that if they're buying in other positions. And I just floating the idea. But I think this part of the squad unsettlement in the summer and in the early days of this season were because Sean Longstaff admitted it the other day, I think, in a podcast, that everyone thought they were up for grabs in the summer. So they knew that anyone could be sold in that window to raise money. And that was hugely unsettling. And Eddie Howe's had to kind of circle the wagons and put his arms around the whole squad and say, look, you're still at Newcastle. We can still achieve things here. It's tough.
People will be asking, though, surely it can't be as bad as last year, given they sold Minter and Yakubu. I know that was to kind of bridge the gap, but surely they're in a better position financially because they haven't spent big in the last couple of windows. Tonali was the last big signing. I know you mentioned like Demos and what have you, but they haven't really spent big. So surely it can't be as bad as we're maybe suggesting it might be, right?
In terms of raising money, or
in terms of needing to raise money, the panic, what happens come June with the accounts? Surely they're in a better position, than they were last June.
Yeah, they must be. I think that scramble, those last few stressful days where it was points deductions were on the table and were a very real possibility. I think in terms of running the club, I think they'll have been told by the Saudis who are overseeing things, and from chief executive level that cannot happen again. It's just embarrassing. You're selling one of your top players in Elliot Anderson and having to buy another keeper. It just looks shoddy in terms of account management. So I don't think they can afford to allow that to happen again.
In hindsight, it might be the best thing that happened maybe to them. Some will argue, because it's woke them up, it's alerted them to the dangers, and they certainly won't want to get in that mess again. There's been a few questions asked about budget, and basically kind of everyone's asking, is it as simple as saying they have X amount to spend? How do we put a number on it?
Well, they will have a budget which they've got to meet by June. So they could overspend that budget in January, but recoup it back before the end of the June. So, they must be capable of making a £70 million signing or 65, because however it's structured, because they put that money on the table to try and get Guehi. So there must be scope to do that. But the word is that they have to raise some money. We don't know how much. They might not have to raise 70 million, but they must have to get something back from somewhere to be able to afford that by the end of June. So, and whether that means selling big like a Bruno or an Isaac or a Tonali even, but that remains to be seen. Because if you sell one of those, that surely would would solve all
We
PSL
saw it,
problems.
didn't we, with Villa, what they did in the summer with their Luis going to Juventus for 45, 50 million. That allowed them to then reinvest in some exciting young talent. And it is something that no Newcastle United fan wants to hear, that at some point you're probably going to have to prepare yourself for an Isaac sale or a Bruno sale, a top player to go. But we always say on this podcast, as long as it's reinvested right, then in the long term, it's a benefit to the club.
Well, squads need freshening up all the time, and they need new challenge. Now, players are always asking, like, who could we sign? What do you reckon? And they're hearing stuff from their mates at other clubs, and they want to know who's coming in and who's going to challenge them. So the players need a challenge. They need new characters to get involved in the squad, to integrate into a squad, and they always want to be impressed by something new, which elevates their game and can take them. As players want the squad to be strengthened because it's going to make them better and finish higher and meet their bonus targets, meet their dreams. And they, being a player at Newcastle is to try and satisfy your own dreams and also the fans' dreams and become complete legends by winning something. And that's why they want, that's why they want new players. We all want new players. So that's the mission, Well,
what do you think the strategy is from right at the top? You see, that's the mission there to get better, to improve, to win something, to become established. Is that what they're thinking? You think in Saudi as well?
Well, the strategy is to become consistent top 6 or top 7 challengers. And if you look at that league now, that's the ambition of probably the top 11 or 12 teams. So it's a tough. It's not like there's become a top 6 or 7 established, and then Newcastle added to it. You've got Brighton in there. You've got Forest doing well, and you've got Man United underperforming, and they're going to probably come good. But though they haven't got much to spend, I've read today. So it's such a competitive league. But if Newcastle can finish in the top 6 consistently, keep knocking on the door of the club cups, get into Europe and get used to playing in Europe, that's kind of I think in the next 3 years, 4 years, that's got to be the kind of plan and the aim for Newcastle. Not winning the league. That might happen if you're knocking on the door and you have a fluky or a lucky season where other teams have dipped. Man City have dipped, had points deducted, whatever. For just being there in the top 6 is like a good achievement for me, and that'll keep Eddie Howe in a job and the players happy and the fans happy.
Well, we have got a couple of questions that were sent in about Jose Mourinho, who a couple of weeks ago the story came out that his people had maybe put his name to certain people at Newcastle United should Eddie Howe lose his job. I mean, I think I just had a little chuckle to myself when I read the story. What about yourself?
I did. I thought that's slightly preposterous. I'm sure Jose Mourinho would love to do the Newcastle job. It'd be another amazing addition to his CV. He's won loads. He knows how to win. He's box office. But is he what Newcastle need now? I don't think Jose Mourinho absolutely definitely not is what Newcastle need now. I think you'd have the cycle of excitement, chaos, and everyone rising to the Jose Mourinho challenge, and then after 6 months there'll be fallouts, there'll be arguments, there'll be back pages everywhere about a bit of chaos, because I think he likes creative tension and he likes conflict, and I think he wants players to feed off the conflict. And I think this Newcastle squad kind of works in a much different way to that. And anyway, Eddie Howe has this job. He's improving players. He's building steadily. He's done really well this year to turn it around from almost like a turning point of people questioning him to finding a new formula or going back to an old formula. And I think that's a big skill and a big talent for a manager to be able to turn it mid-season like they seem to have done. So there's not a vacancy there. Now, if you're talking about what the Saudis want, I don't know. I'm being told all the time by my bosses that Newcastle isn't box office. It's not like up there with Man United and Arsenal and Liverpool, the huge clubs that are challenging and have got a history of winning things. Maybe the Saudis want to eventually one day might want a bit of box office. Maybe they want someone to come and put Newcastle on the map, a global world football figure who can cause some fights and get them on the back page and be mixing it, not just on the pitch, but verbally and sparring with big managers. And maybe at some point, the the Saudis want a bit of fun doing that. But at this point, Eddie Howe, I would suggest, is going absolutely nowhere. And he's building the club, and he's just what Newcastle need at this very point.
It's interesting, isn't it? Because from a PR point of view, Mourinho would take you forward 5 or 6 steps because it would be about him and he would get the global headlines.
Yeah.
But from a footballing point of view, on and off the pitch, you don't want him in because it's like throwing a firework in your understairs cupboard and closing the door. It's just chaos. And yes, you've got the bright lights and the sparks, but what comes when you open that door? It's a bit of a mess.
Yeah.
Eddie Howe, safest houses. The Saudis are happy with what he's done so far. They've backed him through that kind of tough period he had over the last couple of months. Mourinho's got nowhere near that job. And
he's nowhere near it now. I don't think he is. I think that was a speculative story based on what Jose Mourinho wants.
It came at a strange time as well because it just come on the back of 3 wins.
It looked like it should have been run the week before the 3 wins.
Very strange. Priority-wise in the transfer market, this is something that changes for absolutely everybody. And if you're watching on YouTube, do get in the comments and let us know what your priority would be in January. A lot of people say it is a right winger. We know Joe Linton has risen to prominence over the last 2 games and is doing really well on there. Him and Anthony Gordon switching and swapping. Is the right winger priority in January?
I would say so. With Botman coming back, I think that's where most fans would want it investing. Unless they make the striker the priority with an eye on what could happen in the summer. I don't want to talk about Isaac leaving, but he could double his wages elsewhere. Let's not talk about that now. But if they're trying to, I would think right wing is the priority. But if they could add to the striking department as well, or they get a striker who's also versatile and could play out right, a right winger who could play inside. If you can do a duality thing, or like with Mitchell's term, if you could get versatility in a signing, that would be major as well. I think you need a physical, fast, imposing kind of winger who can also fit into Eddie Howe's plan of defending well as well.
Anyone who springs to mind?
No, don't ask me to name targets. Have you got any targets? I mean, Mbeumo has been talked about.
Because people have got their bingo cards out, and I'll just continue to mention the same 2 right wingers. So I'm asking you.
You can't go there at this point because I think the people who we've talked about in the past, like Mbeumo, that it's not just going to be Newcastle in for him. There's going to be Liverpool in for him. There's going to be other teams battling Newcastle, and you've got to. I'd prefer them to find something more under the radar than someone who's had a brilliant start to the season and then they put a lot of money on the table. I think if you find someone more under the radar, then you're when Eddie Howe makes signings, they don't come good immediately. So I think if you want Newcastle to improve next season, you've got to make a couple of signings in January, because we've seen Lewis Hall's development and how Eddie Howe, it's been reported this week, how Eddie Howe developed and his staff developed Lewis Hall. So you buy someone now and they learn the Newcastle playbook. They learn how they've got to train. They get up to speed, Newcastle fit and Eddie Howe fit to fit into the system. And then by next pre-season, you've kind of got a player who's ready to start and improve the first 11. If you buy a player next summer, it's, the way Eddie Howe works, he's not going to be hitting the ground running and being the player you want him to be next September. So you're almost looking 6 months ahead to say that player who's bought now will have the impact then when the staff at Newcastle have got about him and shown him how to play, show him what's demanded of Newcastle. So it's a real long-term planning game, but I think that's what they should be doing.
Have you not seen anyone in the Championship that's caught your eye? Aston Villa have dabbled and they've had a bit of success in recent windows buying up from the Championship. Is there no one that you've seen when you've been down the road covering Sunderland, which you think, they could do a bit of a job at Newcastle?
Well, I mean, if you're going to invest now and get him cheap and then make him into a star player, you'd be looking at Chris Rigg. I mean, I interviewed him 3 weeks ago and he is one smart, serious guy about his football. I've seen pictures of him when he was a kid standing outside the Bobby Robson statue. So he clearly has an affinity with Newcastle in his junior years. I've seen him kiss the Sunderland badge when he scored, and he's totally committed to his building his career at Sunderland because he's getting game time, which you wouldn't get in the Premier League at Sunderland. But he's learning, he's getting kicked about, but he's scoring goals, and he's determined and he's tough. and he's an impish little player, kind of playing on one of the wings at Sunderland, but tracking back so well. He's really good on the ball. He's England under-19 captain. Why wait 2 or 3 years to nab him when his price will almost certainly have gone up to 50, 60? Why? I would have thought Newcastle are looking at him now. He signed a new long-term deal at Sunderland last summer, which has kind of shored up his position there. And he signed it on the promise that he was going to get games. He didn't start the first couple for Sunderland, but he's got into the team and he's developing brilliantly. I don't know if it's the right time in his development to move now. It might be the summer or the January after, but he's certainly one to watch it. And so I've seen him. He runs like Phil Foden. He plays tricky, intricate passes like Phil Foden. He's almost a bit like an Elliot Anderson. So you're kind of replacing. You let Elliot Anderson go, but you're also replacing him with another local boy. That's definitely one that they must be looking at. You know, it's tough to do deals with your rivals, but if you were shoveling Sunderland a load of cash, I'm sure they'd take it and reinvest elsewhere in their youthful squad.
One to watch potentially, but yeah, plenty of options out there. Let us know in the comments who you would like to see Newcastle sign on the right wing. Other positions, I mean, up top is another one that's always on the radar. Someone like Jared Bowen maybe could come in and do a job there. West Ham not having a good time of it of late. I mean, he's properly settled down there in London, so that would be a very hard sell. But you know, Bowen would be a good move for him.
Well, in for Bowen, I think Steve Bruce wanted Bowen like a few years ago when he was only 15, 20 million. He's done brilliantly at West Ham. He's an England national. He's really good, and he really keeps West Ham where they are with the way he plays. He's one of their gems. It'd be quite hard to get him out of West Ham because I can see West Ham going nowhere if they're going nowhere anyway. But if they sold him, but the other striker who looks like he will be available in the summer for about 60 odd million is Gyökeres from. I don't know if I said that right.
No, that was a good attempt.
Gyökeres, and I've seen him play for Coventry against Sunderland, and he was a powerhouse. He was faster than everyone. He was more powerful than everyone. And that was in the Championship. And then he's since then made the move, and he's now at Sporting Lisbon. Now, there's a lot of talk about Man United getting him for around about 65 million because Amorim's moved to Man United. Now, have Man United got the money? Could Newcastle get in on that deal?
It would be a statement signing.
It would be a statement signing, but it would have to come. I think they're not going to have him and Isaac. I think that would be coming if Isaac had to leave and Arsenal put 120 million out on the table. Would you go and get Gyökeres? He looks well set for the Premier League. He looks the part, and in a forward-thinking Newcastle, front-footed Newcastle team, I think he would be great. And he certainly looked the part in the Championship when I saw him.
I really like Matheus Cunha from Wolves. I think he's a brilliant player, and he started the season really well. Very versatile. He can play anywhere across the kind of the midfield and up top as well. He'd be a good sign. Not cheap, but would certainly add to the squad. Yeah,
no one would be cheap though. If you're looking to replace that kind of caliber
for top players, you're going to have to pay the price. Let us know in the comments if there's anything we've missed out in terms of position, in terms of players. Because we may have done, and just clarify, I think, Simon, the point about if there's business in January, does that come at the expense of a signing in the summer, or does it force Newcastle's hand to sell to cover the purchase in January?
No, I think they would have to sell before June if they bought in January, but that doesn't mean after June, when the new PSR cycle happens, another year comes in. I don't think that would stop them buying again in the summer. I mean, there's no point having Paul Mitchell doing this job and thinking big if they can only sign one player in January and then nothing's going to happen in the summer.
It does feel like the rules kind of lend themselves to just trapping.
Are terrible.
Teams.
It's holding Newcastle back, and it's not right. And you know what? The Premier League wants to remain the number one league in Europe and or the world, and the league that everyone turns to globally to watch and to be entertaining and to be there's dominant teams, but anyone can beat anyone, and there can be shock results. And we'd like to think that everyone's team can have a chance at making that breakthrough and winning a cup or getting to Europe or being in contention for Europe. The Premier League has got to find rules that work to let clubs who can afford it and who have aspiration and who want to have a punt. They've got to have rules which allow that to happen. Otherwise, the Premier League shrivels as a league, and you end up clubs that are powerful and as well supported and well backed as Newcastle financially, having to sell players to fund to meet rules and avoid points deductions. It's an absolute nonsense. It's not what the Premier League was about. The Premier League is about creating fantasy for fans and dreams for fans, right down from number 1 position to number 20th position, whatever that dream may be. And the rules are holding clubs back at the minute, and they really need to get their skates on and change them and free it up.
Well, a lot is in the news about the Premier League's financial rules. We've got a question here from Phil who asks, how soon do we expect to wait before the Premier League addresses the related party transactions problem, and how will it affect Newcastle? At the same time, it looks like there's a proposal on the table which has removed the wording of fair market value from the Premier League's rules about sponsorships essentially coming from companies who are connected to the club's owners. But it is a bit of a mess. What are we expecting, do you think, in the short term? Well, should any changes, immediate changes that have been put on the table, should they be pushed back and delayed and real thought put into them? Because it seems like the Premier League just want to push it through.
Well, they've got to get it right this time. Otherwise they're going to get more legal challenges, and the Premier League will eat itself in terms of everyone suing everyone else. And it's really going to put the league at jeopardy, certainly in terms of a European Super League breakaway. So they've got to get it right. I've always been baffled by this fair market value thing. So Newcastle seem to have been really cautious on the deals they've done to try and not break any rules, like possibly Man City did in the past, allegedly, and opened a challenge in the courts as we speak, and the subject of a major inquiry. So we'll see what comes out there. Man City deny that, but we have to. I've always been baffled by this fair market value thing, that if a Saudi company, a PAF-owned company, one of their major brands, Aramco or Saudi Airlines or whichever company, they own trillions of pounds worth of companies, they want to be associated with Newcastle United because it's a global brand. The Saudis believe, because they bought Newcastle, that they can turn it into a club that wins things and that finishes first, second, number one. Number one's their aim, right? Fair market value for that kind of ambition is much higher than Newcastle currently in 8th position, and saying what a fair market value is for Newcastle in 8th position, having not won anything for 60, 70 years. So Newcastle, they've stated ambition to be number 1. If a company wants to come and sponsor Newcastle with the ambition of being number 1, and they're on a journey to going to number 1, which Newcastle we hope are, then they should be paying massive amounts of money for that, way over the odds that the deals that are currently being done in the current rules of fair market value. They should be able to slap tens of millions of pounds on the table to be shirt sponsors or sleeve sponsors or training ground sponsors, because they believe Newcastle United are going to be number 1, and they're going to build a brand in the next 10 years before the Saudi World Cup that is going to be up there with Liverpool, the great northern clubs, and Arsenal, and eclipsing Chelsea, we hope. So that I've never understood why that fair market value, ruled on by some panel that we don't know about, can be legal or right in terms of a club having ambition. So throw that out and let Newcastle get sponsorship deals in from their own clubs. Not stupid, not just shoveling money in, because I don't think that's how the Saudi payoff is working. They want returns for their investment, but certainly higher than the deals that they've got currently.
No, I totally agree with you. I think a lot of people in the comments will do. Before we came in, I did just catch a story which is via the Telegraph. Aston Villa back Man City in the Premier League to postpone crucial APT vote, which then will allow a bit more deep thinking, I think, to go into these rules rather than rush them through. But could that be the first removal of the block, which sees the Premier League's position maybe collapse? They knew Newcastle are likely to back City. We've seen, in previous months that they were in their corner, so to speak. But could Villa start the domino effect? Other teams follow?
Well, it's hard to get these rules passed because you need 14 clubs to back you or to rebel against whatever's being proposed. So you need every club's got an equal vote. There's 20 clubs with votes to change these rules, and there's obviously a self-interested elite who are voting one way, and there are other clubs who haven't got that kind of backing or don't need the rules loosened in another camp. It needs to be sorted out, and they're probably better off sorting it out by the summer, so everyone knows where they are by the end of June and
Yeah.
can do their spending or new deals correspondingly.
I think, look, City have their own agenda and own reasons behind what they're doing, but I totally agree with the fact that whatever the amendments are to the rules, they should not be made within a month, 6 weeks of the last case going through. We know there's a bigger picture with 115 charges, but this is something that the Premier League have to get right, as you've said. So taking a little bit more time to make sure it's right is exactly what they should be doing. And the City have reportedly written to rivals to tell them that they are voting blind on next week's amendments to the APT rules that remain void while Tribunal clarifies 175-page ruling. So this is going to rumble on and on and on. But I totally back City's point there. You can't just push it through when there's other things playing away in the background. You've got to get this right. So take your time and make sure you get it right.
Yes, that's true. However, I do, looking at the wrangling behind the scenes and the self-interest from owners, and not just owners now who care about football, because they're owners who are wanting a return and speculative investors. I do wonder if they'll ever be able to get an agreement that's not then the subject of lengthy legal challenge. And I think that's putting the Premier League as a league at risk. It's putting everything that's been built up over the last kind of 30 years and the number one dominant position of the Premier League. The current rules are putting it at risk. And the legal, if they can't find a truce between all these clubs, and the Premier League is mired in rules, mired in legal challenge, then that is a worrying situation for the future of the Premier League. I don't think enough that nationally and has been made of this. Clubs could walk away from the Premier League. Clubs could walk away to a European Super League and think there's more money and less wrangling happening there. And it's already been tried once. And this is kind of given this kind of wrangling and rule and unfair rules and disagreement is kind of tipping them toward. I would think it's tipping those American investors owning big clubs towards doing that. And I think our domestic football will be put at risk by it all. And that's an extreme position to take, but maybe it's not. That's just thinking ahead and wondering how the hell you're going to get 14 club majority to pass any proposal when all these proposals are based on self-interest and in maintaining an elite at the top because they don't want to relinquish their position at the top.
Yeah, it's a bit of a mess. We'll keep an interest on what happens, of course, and you can find out everything on chroniclelive.co.uk. But thanks to Simon for coming in and answering your questions on Newcastle United. I hope you've enjoyed the episode. Give the video a thumbs up, share it amongst your Newcastle United supporting friends and family. Click on that link for your NORD VPN discounted offer. It's well worth your time and your money. Head over to chroniclelive.co.uk. Like I say, for all the latest Newcastle United news, and from myself and Simon, we'll see you guys very soon.